I was recently on a plane, flying from New York to London, and sitting next to a woman from Kenya. As we got to chatting, the inevitable question came up: what do you do for a living? I told her that I was a journalist, and that I had just finished writing a book about an extraordinary population of Chinese women known as shengnu, or leftover women. Left over because they had failed to get married by the culturally prescribed expiration date of 25 or 27 or 30, depending on who you ask. Now, when I usually share this word with someone who's unfamiliar with it, the reaction is usually a mix of surprise and dismay, but not the woman sitting next to me. She simply said, "Omusasusi." "Omusasusi," I said. Yes, omusasusi. This is what we call these women in my tribe in Kenya. She then told me that Kenya has 52 different tribes and 52 different dialects. And although she didn't speak them all, she could assure me that every single tribe had the equivalent of omusasusi because, much to the dismay of tribe leaders, more and more Kenyan women were getting married and having children at a later age. Shengnu. It's a word that has many equivalents that span cultures and span languages. In France, Catrinette. In Germany, Frauenmangel. In Japan, Christmas cake. Do you know why? Because Christmas is on the 25th of December. So the idea is, after your 25th birthday, you're done. Gold Miss, South Korea. Jamona solterona, Latin America. This means a lonely ham. And the US, perhaps we can say Carrie Bradshaw's. Now, regardless of the different tone of each word, I know some of them are more negative than others. Ultimately, these words all mean the same thing. They represent a class of women who are carving out a new timeline for their young adult years. A class of women who perhaps choose to flesh themselves and their careers out a bit more fully before making any major commitments. I first became interested in leftover women because when I first arrived in China, they were everywhere. It seemed like every woman I was meeting was a so-called leftover. The Beijing television station where I was working at the time was full of leftovers. They were the producers and the editors and the directors, a vibrant population of young women who I deeply admired. In my eyes, they should have been the toast of the nation, a glittering testament to all of the increased educational and professional opportunities that Chinese women had accumulated over the past 30 years. And yet, their label indicated otherwise. I became particularly close with my colleague Shanshan, who was 24 at the time and had moved to Beijing from Anhui province in a bid to make a better life for herself. She dreamed of becoming a documentary filmmaker and was squarely on the path to making that come true, except that every year, especially during Chinese New Year, when she went home, the Inquisition would begin. 你结婚了吗？还没结婚，没有男朋友，什么时候结婚？年龄快到了。And on and on and on. As was true for the rest of our colleagues, Shanshan's parents were in a marriage frenzy. And when she explained this to me, I couldn't understand. I didn't understand their anxiety over her becoming a leftover. I didn't understand the mania, the stress. But most of all, I didn't understand the word, leftover. It seemed like such an unfair and inaccurate portrayal of a population of women who I truly believed showed great promise. So, now, I would like to explain, it seems like you already know, but who are leftovers? Where do they come from? And why do there seem to suddenly be so many of them? Well, the best answer I can provide for that has to do something with a chart. Now, the chart you're about to see is my favorite chart. The blue dots on this chart represent countries where men are the dominant earners of college degrees, meaning more men than women in each one of these countries earns a college degree than women. There are 120 dots on this chart. It was prepared by a group of demographers in Barcelona, and the red dots represent countries where women have higher education, greater numbers of higher education than men. So the chart right now is set to 1970. And you can see that at the time, it was a very blue world. Men were clearly holding the keys to greater education. But watch what happens when we flip forward into the future. Remember, red dots, women. Welcome to the future. So, as this chart makes very clear, by the year 2050, nearly all of the dots show that women will be the dominant earners of higher education. Now, this is a huge paradigm-shattering shift that is going to have a tremendous impact on the way relationships are formed, marriages work, and how we live. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's take a closer look at where China figures into all of this. In China, the crossover year is not 2050. In fact, it already happened in 2012. So congratulations, ladies. You now earn more higher education than men. 中国女人已经很牛逼. And as you can see, the leading countries in this push towards education are mainly all in Asia. We have Singapore at the front, followed by Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong just a little bit behind. So watch out. Asia's on the roll. Now, to make better sense of the implications of this chart, I'd like to draw your attention to a different set of data. So, as some of you may already know, the natural birth ratio, the natural sex ratio at birth, is 100 to 105, which basically means that for every 100 girls that are born, there are 105 boys. This is a law of nature. It tends to happen this way. So if we look at China, in 1950 and 1960, 70, towards the 80s, the sex ratio balance was quite normal. There were a rather even number of girls and boys. But as we get into the early 80s, the later 80s, the 90s, and 2000, we see that that number goes up. And it gets to dangerously high levels, reaching 120. Why did this happen? The one-child policy, when combined with China's traditional preference for boys, has led to a surplus of men. This surplus has accumulated over the years to the extent that by the year 2020, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences estimates that there will be 30 million more men of marriage age in China than women. 30 million men. Now, when I first heard this number, I thought, where are these men hiding? Maybe I can find them and introduce them to my leftover friends. It turns out that wasn't going to be so easy. Because if we look at the regional breakdown of where these men are located, a different story emerges. This is a map of China. And you see that areas like Tianjin, Zhejiang, Beijing, 我的老家, and Shanghai have reasonably mild gender imbalance. But as you click through to different provinces, Jiangsu, Fujian, up to 120, Hunan, 126, Hubei, Henan, 130, Anhui, 131, Guangdong, 137, and 138 in Jiangxi. What we start to see from this data is that overwhelmingly, the vast majority of China's surplus men were born in the most rural, some of the poorest areas of China, which means that geographically, socially, economically, and educationally, they're not exactly compatible with leftover women. So what we see is that China right now has two huge populations of leftovers. Leftover men, who represent the past, imbalance, rural areas, and poverty, and leftover women, who are a product of the future, of greater opportunities for women, a truly new China. and there are no signs that the rates of leftover women are ever going down. You see, in 1985, the light green is China, only 5.3% of women remained unmarried by the age of 29. By 2010, that percentage has jumped to 21%. And all signs indicate that the patterns of leftover women, the numbers of leftover women, are going to imitate other countries in Asia, South Korea, Singapore, Japan, and Hong Kong, that had a push for education before China did. We also see that between the ages of 30 and 34, the number of women remaining single beyond the age of 34 are going up. In China in 1985, 0.7%. Virtually everyone in the entire country in 1985 was married. Now, well, in 2010, that's 5.4%. And I'm sure if you get more recent data, it will even be higher. So, as the stories of leftover women continued to fill my ears, I realized that they were an incredibly important population. And I began to chronicle their lives in a book. The more I spoke with leftover women, the more I realized that their lives were broadcasting a mini diorama of the story of China's rise and development, the blueprints of a country that had soared from one economic and social extreme to another. I began to investigate the institution of marriage in China, and I realized that for centuries it has been a very important institution. Historically, economically, socially, politically, it's been used as a means of sealing alliances, brokering deals, enforcing ideologies. A former party official who I interviewed about this told me that marriage in China is the wind chime upon which all changes in the socio-political climate are announced. Taking all of this into account, I was sold. I began to write my book. I'm happy to say that that book is now complete, and it will be on the stands in 2016. But until then, I'm here to talk to you about a very special project that grew out of that book. As soon as the first draft of my book was done, I felt this desire to do something else. Writing a book about leftover women is a privilege. You get to spend time with some of the funniest, most trailblazing women in China. But at the same time, it's very difficult. Capturing the complexities of their lives and the emotion of their stories is a very tall order. I had a desire to show a live audience what I was experiencing as I interviewed these leftover women. And so, the leftover monologues were born. I don't have much experience in theater, but with the tremendous help of Lean In Think Tank Beijing and a very brave cast of 13 women and 3 men who volunteered to write their stories, very candid, very visceral, very personal, intimate stories that they shared on stage, our play came to be. I'll introduce some of the cast to you now. Che Xiao, in the middle, is best described by the opening line of her monologue. She says, "I am not a man, and I am not a woman." And this is when the audience looks at her in a funny way. And she says, "I'm a female PhD." And actually, I should tell you, she was being modest. She's a postdoc. This is Caroline. Her monologue is about China's very strict ideals for beauty, and how when she was a young girl, her mom always told her that she needed to study hard because her eyes were too small and she would never attract a good husband. Suffice it to say that all of that studying has paid off in great dividends. Kirsty's monologue is called The Gap, and it's about this idea that when you're young, you can fall in love very innocently and with abandon, but that as soon as you graduate college, it seems like this whole set of yaoqiu, of standards, are imposed on your marriage search. You need to think about someone's hukou and someone, whether they own a car or whether they own a home, and she didn't want to search this way. Next, we have Naomi. She does what I call a bit of Shengnu 101, talking about all the silly things that women do to make themselves more appealing to men. They go on crazy diets, they try to learn French to be more romantic. Then we have Yolanda. Yolanda's actually in the crowd, and I hope she doesn't kill me for doing this, but Yolanda's a powerhouse. She is the co-founder of Lean In Think Tank Beijing, which provided tremendous support for this play. And I have to say that one of my favorite lines in her monologue was a quote from her mother, who said something like, 我每次看见你，我感觉你越来越老，越来越胖，你快加不进去。This is Reggie. Reggie was our brave leftover man who told a story about a former relationship in which he had very unrealistic expectations of how his girlfriend should tend to the domestic duties. He shares how it was only when he lost this girl that he truly learned to love. So, before I end this talk today, I would like to say that tomorrow is a very important day. After 4 sold-out performances in Beijing, the Leftover Monologues are having their Shanghai debut. We will be performing at the Pearl Theater tomorrow afternoon. Now, since we first started this play 8 months ago in Beijing, much has changed in the lives of our performers. In fact, about half of them are no longer single. Yes, we even have a baby on the way. That, when you join the Leftover Monologues, good things happen. But we didn't change the name of our play, despite the change in status of many of our performers, because we came to realize that more than a label, Leftover is a mindset. It is the trademark of any person who challenges social prescriptions for gender roles or for timelines for young adulthood. Yes, leftover women are an incredibly important population with tremendous potential to incite a lot of much-needed change in society. And yes, they do go by many names all around the world. But ultimately, and more broadly defined, a leftover is simply anyone who believes in the right to their happiness and is willing to stand up and defend it, even if it means living in a way that is considered unconventional, suspect, or tragic. I believe that there's a tiny bit of leftover in every single one of us. And if you listen to it, good things happen. So, before I leave you, I'm going to share a quote from Kirsty, one of the performers you met before. When she came to the first meeting for the monologue, she was in a frenzy. She was 24 years old, and her dad decided she needed to get married. The problem is, he was approaching her marriage search like a football coach. Go, get the man, quickly, before you're too old and not appealing anymore. This is exactly what she was saying. She didn't believe in this approach and developed her own. She's since met someone with whom she's very happy, and I'm going to describe a quote from her revised monologue to tell you a bit how she arrived where she is today. Stick to your values, but don't be too picky. Choose the love that you want, but not at the price of losing self-esteem. Be realistic, but don't be cruel. Be idealistic, but don't be a total dreamer. We are social creatures, so it is difficult not to be influenced by external pressures. But ultimately, we are individuals. We have the ability to make our own decisions, to listen to our minds, and to heed our hearts. And we must. Ladies and gentlemen, that is balance as defined by the Leftover Monologues. Thank you.